The fluorescent lights in St. Mercy's emergency department hummed like dying wasps trapped in glass tombs. Elena Rivera had worked triage for 7 years, long enough that the antiseptic smell no longer registered, long enough that screams became background music. But tonight, the computer screen glowed with a color she'd never seen before. Not red for critical, not yellow for urgent, but something between purple and the absence of light. Exigent, the display read, Patient, Holloway Thomas. Room 7, the words sat heavy in her mind, like a stone dropped in still water. She knew what exigent meant, of course, urgent, demanding immediate action. But she'd never seen it used in triage before, never seen those symbols flickering after the name. Angular marks that hurt to look at directly, like trying to read something reflected in a broken mirror. Elena's hand moved to the call button. Her fingers, steady through countless traumas, trembled. "I'll take it," she heard herself say, though she didn't remember deciding to speak. Room 7 waited at the end of the corridor, that stretch of hallway that always felt longer after midnight. The air grew colder with each step, her breath misting despite the hospital's aggressive heating. Through the small window in the door, she could see Thomas Holloway sitting upright on the gurney, his hospital gown pristine white. Too white. White like bone china, like funeral flowers, like things that had never lived. His eyes found hers through the glass. They were the color of old pennies, oxidized and green. "Nurse Rivera," he said, though she hadn't opened the door, though his voice shouldn't have carried through the reinforced walls. "I've been waiting for you." The door swung open under her palm. Had she pushed it? She must have pushed it. And the cold inside wrapped around her like wet sheets. Thomas Holloway sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap with the precision of a praying mantis. The monitors beside him showed flat lines, had always shown flat lines, would always show flat lines. "What do you need?" Elena asked. The question felt scripted, words she'd spoken before in dreams she couldn't quite remember. "Count my regrets," Thomas said. His voice had the quality of wind through empty buildings. "There are 37. You must count them before the hour changes, or I cannot proceed." The request should have been absurd. Should have sent her fleeing for security, for Dr. Ramos, for anyone. Instead, Elena found herself nodding, found her lips forming numbers as Thomas Holloway spoke. Each regret was a small death. A daughter's birthday miss, a cruelty to a lover, a lie that metastasized into betrayal. By 37, Elena's throat ached with unshed tears for a stranger's life. "Thank you," Thomas said, and faded like morning fog, leaving behind only the faint smell of earth and rainwater. The computer screen glowed purple-black when she returned to the nurse's station. Another name, another room, another impossible demand. Patient, Chun, Margaret. Room 12, bleed the color 9. Patient, Desmond, James. Room 4, remove my bones but leave me standing. Patient, Okwe, Grace. Room 9, speak my true name backward until I remember how to die. The night unspooled like thread from a fraying garment. Elena moved through the demands in a fog of compliance, her hands performing tasks that shouldn't have been possible. Margaret Chun's 9th color bled from her fingertips when Elena pressed the right pressure points, a shade between sorrow and bronze. James Desmond's bones slipped from his body like silk scarves when Elena whispered the proper words, leaving him standing, translucent, finally able to pass through the door he'd been facing for so long. The patterns emerged slowly, the way dawn creeps across the floor. Each patient she helped disappeared, moving on to whatever waited beyond St. Mercy's eternal emergency department. Each completion made the next demand seem less strange, more like protocol, like something she'd been trained to do in an orientation she couldn't quite recall. Then her own name appeared on the screen. Rivera, Elena, Room 3, Exigent. The hallway stretched before her, longer than it had ever been, lined with doors she'd never noticed before. Room 3 sat at the very end, its light a different quality than the others. softer, sadder, like candlelight through amber. She walked. What else was there to do? Through the window, she saw herself on the gurney. Younger, wearing the same scrubs she'd worn on her first day at St. Mercy. Her other self's eyes were closed, her chest still, the monitors flat and silent. There was blood in her hair, glass glittering like diamonds in the wounds. The car accident, the rainy Tuesday. The intersection she'd crossed 1,000 times. 7 years ago. She'd been here 7 years. The door opened. The other Elena, the dead Elena, the real Elena, opened her copper green eyes. What do you need? Elena heard herself ask, heard the script completing. Remember, her own voice said from the gurney. Remember and let yourself go. The fluorescent lights hummed their wasp song. The antiseptic smell finally registered, chemical and cold. Elena Rivera understood at last what exigent truly meant. That moment of unbearable urgency when a soul realizes it's been holding on too long, demanding more time than is reasonable, refusing to accept the only diagnosis that matters. She took her own cold hand. She counted her regrets. There were 41. And when the hour changed, Elena Rivera finally moved on, leaving the nurse's station empty, the screen dark, St. Mercy's emergency department one soul lighter. By morning, no one would remember she'd ever worked there at all. The call came in at 3:47 a.m., the way it always did. Emma Mitchum had been a 911 dispatcher for 11 years, long enough to recognize the different flavors of panic. The sharp metallic taste of real emergencies, the syrupy thickness of loneliness disguised as crisis. But this call tasted like copper and ash, like biting down on aluminum foil with a mouth full of fillings. 911, what's your emergency? They're in the walls. The child's voice was small and precise, each word enunciated with the careful diction of someone reading from a script they didn't quite understand. Grow, maybe 7 or 8. Background noise like wind through a tunnel, or breath through damaged lungs. What's your address, sweetheart? Emma's fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to dispatch. The screen had already flagged the call exigent. Life-threatening, immediate response required. The address populated automatically. 1847 Ashwood Lane. They're in the walls, the child repeated, and the line went dead. Emma dispatched 2 units, standard protocol. She'd done it 6 times before. Same child, same address, same 4 words delivered in that eerily calm voice. And 6 times, Officers Chen and Rodriguez had returned with the same report. Vacant lot. No structure, no child, no emergency. Probably a prank, Rodriguez had said the first time, but his eyes held something else. Something that looked like the memory of standing in that empty lot, feeling watched by the ground itself. The 7th time, Emma stayed late after her shift. The recordings archive hummed in the basement, a concrete room that always felt too small, where the air tasted like old electronics and secrets. She pulled up every call from 1847 Ashwood Lane, lined them up on her screen like evidence at a crime scene. 3:47 a.m. every single time. The same time stomp down to the second. She adjusted her headphones and pressed play, listening to them in sequence. One after another, that small voice. They're in the walls. They're in the walls. They're in the walls. But underneath. Emma turned up the volume, leaned in until the speakers pressed against her ears. Underneath, there was something else. A rhythm. A pattern of breathing that didn't belong to the child. Each call had another voice buried in the static, whispering words Emma couldn't quite make out, growing clearer with each recording. The 8th call came on a Thursday. Emma's hand shook as she answered. 911, what's your emergency? They're in the walls. But this time, the child's voice had company. In the background of the call, clear as church bells, Emma heard her own voice screaming. Not speaking, screaming. Words she couldn't make out, terror she could taste. She checked the address, 1847 Ashwood Lane, like always. But beneath it, the system displayed another location, 2614 Thornhill Court, Emma's apartment. Her blood became winter, slow and thick in her veins. I'm not calling. I'm here. I'm at work. The child on the line said nothing. In the background, Emma's own voice shrieked about things in the walls. Please God, the walls are moving. They're coming through. And the sound of something scratching, scraping like fingernails on the inside of wood, on the inside of bone. The timestamp at the bottom of her screen read, call received January 17th, 2026, 3:47 a.m. Today was January 14th, 3 days from now. She was listening to herself call 911 3 days from now. Emma's supervisor found her in the archive room at dawn. Headphones tangled around her throat like she'd tried to strangle herself with them, or like something had tried to strangle her while she listened. She told him everything, the words spilling out like confession, like madness. He looked at her with a gentle concern reserved for employees approaching breakdown, suggested time off, maybe talking to someone. She went home. What else could she do? The apartment felt different, the way familiar things do when you've learned to fear them. Emma walked through each room, pressing her palms against the walls, listening. Drywall and silence. Nothing more, nothing less. But the silence had texture now, had weight, had the quality of held breath. She didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Every sound became suspect. The building settling, pipes expanding, neighbors moving through their own walls like ghosts in adjacent dimensions. On the 15th, Emma heard the first scratch. On the 16th, she saw the bulge in her bedroom wall, like something pressing from inside, learning the shape of her space. 3:47 a.m. on the 17th came like an appointment with fate. Emma sat on her couch, phone in hand, watching the clock. 3:46 and 30 seconds. 3:46 and 45 seconds. Every second a small eternity. The walls breathed around her. She could see them now, expanding and contracting like lungs. Like the apartment was alive and she'd been living inside something vast and patient. 3:47 and 00 seconds. The scratching erupted from every wall at once, a symphony of invasion. The bulges spread like bruises, like tumors, pushing through the drywall in shapes almost human. Almost, but not quite. Fingers too long, joints bending in wrong directions, faces pressing through the paint with expressions of terrible hunger. Emma's hands moved on their own muscle memory from 11 years of crisis response. She dialed 911, heard her own voice answer, professional and distant. 911, what's your emergency? They're in the walls, Emma screamed into the phone, and somewhere in the past. In the archive room, in the dispatch center, in every moment she'd listened to that child's voice. She finally understood. There had never been a child. The voice had always been hers, compressed by time and terror into something small and strange. The call had been looping, feeding back on itself, a recording that created its own origin. She'd been listening to her own future, and by listening, had made it inevitable. The things pushed through the walls like birth, like resurrection, like the universe correcting an error in its code. Emma's voice on the phone asked for her address, and she gave it. 2614 Thornhill Court. Knowing that somewhere, a dispatcher named Emma Mitchum was logging this call, flagging it Exigent, sending units that would find only an empty apartment. No body, no blood, no evidence. Just 4 words echoing in the recordings, waiting to be discovered again. They're in the walls, Emma whispered, and the line went dead, and the walls opened like flowers, like mouths, like the end of a story that had always been eating itself. The last thing she heard was the child's voice, her voice, beginning the call again, somewhere in the past. 3:47 a.m., exactly. Marcus Henderson stopped breathing for 4 minutes and 17 seconds beneath the surface of Lake Coldwater. His daughter found him floating face down near the dock, arms spread like a fallen angel, the July sun turning the water around him into liquid amber. The paramedics said it was a miracle. His wife called it a blessing. Marcus knew better. The lake had let him go, but it hadn't let him go free. The first demand came 3 nights after the drowning, sliding into his consciousness like a fish hook through soft tissue. Not a voice, exactly, more like need. Urgent and consuming, the way thirst feels after days in the desert, the way hunger gnaws when it's been too long between meals. Bring me a stone from your garden by midnight, or your daughter stops breathing. Marcus sat upright in bed, his lungs seizing with phantom water. The bedside clock read 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes. He knew with the certainty of prophecy that this was not a dream, not a delusion spawned by oxygen-starved neurons misfiring in his reconstructed brain. He brought the lake its stone, drove to the shore in his pajamas, feet bare against the accelerator, and threw a piece of granite into the water precisely at midnight. The surface accepted it without a ripple, without acknowledgement, but in their bedroom 7 miles away, his daughter Emma gasped awake from a nightmare about not being able to breathe. His wife Rachel found him at the kitchen table at dawn, soaking wet though it hadn't rained. He couldn't explain the dampness that seeped from his pores now, the way his skin always felt clammy, like he'd never quite dried off. Bad dreams, he said, and she believed him because the alternative was unthinkable. The second demand arrived like clockwork, like drowning. Speak my name 7 times before dawn, or your wife forgets your face. Marcus drove to the lake in the pre-dawn darkness, that hour when the world holds its breath between night and day. He stood at the water's edge and spoke the name that had bubbled up from some deep place inside him, a word that tasted like silt and centuries. Cold water, cold water, cold water. 7 times, his voice echoing across the obsidian surface. The lake listened with the patience of something that had waited a very long time. When he returned home, Rachel was making coffee. She smiled at him, recognition bright in her eyes, and Marcus felt relief crash through him like a wave. But her smile held something else too. A question she didn't quite ask, a concern she couldn't quite name. She'd been on the edge of forgetting. He'd seen it in that half second before recognition, that terrible blankness where his face should have been. The demands continued, growing stranger, more specific, more wrong. Pour a gallon of water into the basement every night for a week. Draw my depths on your walls in blue crayon. Sleep in the bathtub with your head underwater for as long as you can hold your breath. Marcus complied with the desperate efficiency of the devout. Each task completed bought him time, bought his family safety from consequences he dared not test. But each completion changed him in ways Rachel couldn't ignore, ways that made Emma stare at her father with wide, uncertain eyes. His fingers began to web, just slightly, just enough that he had to stop shaking hands with colleagues, had to keep his hands in his pockets during conversations. The translucent skin between his fingers caught the light like fishnet, delicate and terrible. He could hold his breath for 20 minutes now, 30 minutes, an hour. Water no longer felt foreign in his lungs. Sometimes, late at night, breathing air felt like the strange thing, like he was doing it wrong, like a fish gasping on land. 3 months after the drowning, Marcus stood in the shower and watched gills flutter open along his ribs. Rachel saw them. Of course she saw them. You can't hide something like that from someone who's shared your bed for 15 years, who's mapped every scar and freckle of your body. What's happening to you? Her voice was ice and fear, a frozen lake cracking under weight. Marcus wanted to lie. The truth sat heavy on his tongue like a stone, like the granite he'd thrown into the depths. The lake is making me into something that can go back. You're not going back. Rachel grabbed his webbed hands, holding tight despite the wrongness of them. We'll leave. Tonight. We'll move across the country. Somewhere with no water somewhere. The demand hit him like a riptide, pulling him under mid-conversation. His knees buckled. Water poured from his mouth, from his nose, from the gills in his sides. Lake water, cold and ancient, flooding their bathroom floor. "Return to me tonight," the lake said, and it wasn't a request anymore. "Bring 7 others, or I take everyone you love. Your daughter, your wife, your mother in the nursing home, your brother in Phoenix, your college roommate in Seattle. I am in every faucet, every pipe, every rain cloud. I am patient, I am deep. I am everywhere water goes." Marcus understood then, with the clarity of someone who drowned and been reborn, what the lake had been doing all along. The demands hadn't been random. They'd been transformation. Each task had made him less human, more aquatic, more useful to something that needed servants in the world above. The lake hadn't saved him from drowning. It had been drowning him slowly, deliberately, turning him into a missionary for the depths. That night, Marcus sat at the kitchen table and told Rachel everything, every demand, every change, every terrible choice ahead. "I have to go back," he said. His voice bubbled with water that rose from lungs that no longer needed air the way they used to. "But I won't bring anyone else. I won't give it what it wants. Then it kills us." Rachel's face was pale, composed, terribly brave. "All of us? Maybe." Marcus looked at his webbed hands, at the gills breathing beneath his shirt, at the man he'd been dissolving like salt in infinite water. "Or maybe when I refuse, when I go back alone and deny it what it demands, it loses its hold. Maybe it only has power because I gave it power, because I believed the consequences would happen." It was a desperate theory, a drowning man's last grasp at hope. But at 11:47 p.m., Marcus Henderson walked into Lake Coldwater for the last time. He walked until the water covered his head, until his feet left the muddy bottom, until he floated in that terrible space between surface and depth. 7, the lake demanded, its voice the whisper of 1,000 drownings. "You promised. You obeyed. You are mine." "No," Marcus said, and his voice carried through the water like sonar, like defiance, like the last human thing he had left. "I'm going to drown now, really drown. And you get nothing." He exhaled, pushing out the water from his lungs, forcing the air back in. His gills sealed themselves. He could feel them closing, his body trying to return to what it had been. The pain was extraordinary. The lake thrashed around him, furious, urgent, demanding. Marcus breathed air and drowned in water, choosing human death over monstrous life. The sun rose over Lake Coldwater like it always did, indifferent and gold. They found his body at noon, lungs full of water, fingers still webbed, gills scarred shut along his ribs. Rachel and Emma stood on the dock, holding each other while the police asked their questions. They were alive. They were whole. They remembered his face. And every faucet in their house ran clear and silent, making no demands at all. The lake had lost its servant. For now, it would wait. It was patient. It was deep. It had all the time in the world.